The fluorescent lights of the coffee shop hummed a flat, tired note, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my life. I was 26, and my name is Chloe. I remember tracing the grain of the wooden table with my finger, feeling a profound sense of being stuck. My job in graphic design was fine, my apartment was fine, my life was a masterpiece of beige mediocrity. I was waiting for my best friend, Sarah, a ritual as familiar as the chipped mug the barista always gave me. When she bustled in, a whirlwind of blonde hair and positive energy, she immediately saw the slump in my shoulders. "Okay, spill. Is it Mark again?" she asked, sliding into the booth opposite me. I shrugged. Mark was the most recent in a string of underwhelming dates, a guy whose primary personality trait was an encyclopedic knowledge of craft beers. It's just, everything. It all feels so predictable. I feel like I'm living a movie I've already seen 100 times. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, sipped her latte. "You need a shake-up, Chloe. Maybe a new hobby, pottery, rock climbing, speed dating." She wiggled her eyebrows. I groaned. The last thing I need is another app telling me I have a 72% compatibility with a guy whose profile picture is him holding a fish. "Fine, no apps," she conceded. "But you have to get out of your own head. Come to that charity gala with me next weekend. It's for the Children's Hospital. It'll be fancy, there'll be champagne, and there are always decent, single, philanthropic men at those things." I agreed, mostly to get her to stop talking about it. A week later, I found myself standing in front of my full-length mirror, adjusting the straps of a little black dress that felt a bit too fancy for my personality. The gala was in a grand hotel ballroom, all glittering chandeliers and the soft murmur of well-dressed people. Sarah, true to form, had immediately disappeared into the crowd to network, which I knew meant scouting for eligible bachelors on my behalf. I found a relatively quiet corner near a towering ice sculpture that was slowly melting into a puddle of abstract art. I was sipping a glass of champagne, feeling profoundly out of place, when a voice next to me said, "Looks like it's losing the fight." I turned. The man standing beside me was tall, with kind brown eyes and a smile that seemed genuinely warm, not the polished, practiced kind I was used to. He was handsome in a quiet, unassuming way, dressed in a well-fitted but not flashy suit. "The sculpture," he clarified, nodding toward it. "I've been watching it for 10 minutes. It's a valiant effort, but gravity is undefeated." I laughed, a real, unforced laugh. I was thinking the same thing. It's a metaphor for my will to make small talk. "Ouch," he said, his smile widening. "Well, I'm Ben, and I promise, my small talk is at least a B+. And that's how it started. We talked for what felt like minutes but was probably an hour. The conversation was effortless. He wasn't trying to impress me, he was just talking. He told me he was a structural engineer, that he liked fixing old clocks and hated the sound of people chewing. I told him about my beige life, my creative block, my fear of turning into one of the melted blobs of the ice swan between us. He listened, really listened. When Sarah finally found me, she had a triumphant glint in her eye that quickly turned to approval when she saw Ben. He excused himself to get a drink, and Sarah pounced. "Who is he?" "He's cute, and he has kind eyes. His name is Ben," I said, feeling a flutter in my stomach I hadn't felt in years. "He's different." The rest of the evening was a blur. We exchanged numbers, and the first text came later that night, just as I was getting into my pajamas. "Still thinking about that ice sculpture's tragic demise. Hope you made it home before your will to socialize completely liquefied, Ben." I grinned like an idiot. What followed was a whirlwind of the best kind. Ben was consistent, thoughtful, and refreshingly normal. Our dates were simple. Long walks in the park, trying to identify trees neither of us knew the names of, cooking disastrously complicated recipes in his tiny kitchen, laughing until our sides hurt when a supposedly simple souffle collapsed into a pancake. He was a gentleman, always walking me to my door, his kisses sweet and full of promise, but he never pushed for more. This went on for 2 months. 2 months of growing certainty that I had finally found someone who saw me, the real me, buried under all the beige. My friends loved him. My cat, a usually judicious creature named Gouda, purred the first time Ben sat on my couch. It was all perfect. Then came the night of his work party. It was a more formal event, and I was nervous. Meeting colleagues felt like a big step. He picked me up, looking handsome and proud, and held my hand the entire drive. The party was in a sleek, modern office building downtown. Ben was clearly respected, and he introduced me to everyone with a proprietary warmth that made my heart swell. As the night wound down, we were standing near the elevators, saying our goodbyes to a few stragglers. His boss, a large, jovial man named Frank, clapped Ben on the back. "This is the famous Chloe. Ben hasn't stopped talking about you. You've made our best engineer a very happy man." I blushed, squeezing Ben's hand. Frank then turned to Ben, his tone shifting to one of gruff affection. "Come here, you," he said, and pulled Ben into a hearty, back-slapping hug. It was a classic, bro hug, the kind you see a million times. But as Frank wrapped his arms around Ben, I saw it. It was a flicker, so fast I almost missed it. A micro-expression that flashed across Ben's face. It wasn't discomfort, it wasn't surprise, it was pure, unadulterated fear. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, his body went rigid, not in a "guys don't hug" way, but in a visceral, fight-or-flight way. His jaw clenched, and he seemed to stop breathing. It was there and gone so quickly that if I'd blinked, I would have missed it. Frank released him, none the wiser, and Ben's warm, easy smile was back in place as if it had never left. But I had seen it. The seed was planted. On the drive home, I was quiet. "You okay?" Ben asked, his hand finding mine again. "Yeah, just tired," I lied. "It was a great party." "It was, wasn't it?" he said, his voice full of contentment. But my mind was racing. That look, what was that? I replayed it over and over in my head. It was just a hug. A simple, friendly hug from a boss who clearly adored him. Why would that provoke such a primal reaction? The next few days, I became a detective of the subconscious. I started noticing other tiny, almost imperceptible things. The way he always sat with his back to the wall in restaurants. How he never liked anyone walking directly behind him. The subtle flinch if I moved my hand too quickly near his face, even in play. He'd always pass it off as being ticklish or just startled. I'd believed him. But now, coupled with the hug, these tiny data points began to form a constellation of something darker. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my own stomach. The perfect man, the perfect relationship, was it built on a foundation I knew nothing about? Who was this man I was falling in love with? A week later, we were at his apartment, watching a movie. A war documentary came on, and during a scene with sudden, loud explosions, I saw him jump, his whole body tensing. He quickly muted the TV. "Sorry," he said with a strained laugh. "Not a fan of loud noises." It was the opening I needed. The air in the room felt thick, charged. My heart was pounding in my ears. I paused the movie, turning to face him on the couch. "Ben," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." His smile was cautious. "Of course, anything." I took a deep breath. "That night at your work party, when Frank hugged you." I saw the shutters come down in his eyes immediately, a defensive wall slamming into place. But I pressed on, gently. "I saw your face. For just a second, you looked terrified." He looked away, his jaw working. "I don't know what you're talking about, Chloe. It was just a hug." "I know it was," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's why I'm asking. And the way you flinch sometimes, or need to see the exits, Ben, what is it? You can talk to me." The silence that followed was the heaviest I have ever experienced. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. He stared at his hands, clenched in his lap. I could see the war raging inside him, the desire to keep his walls up, versus the terrifying prospect of letting someone in. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, stripped of its usual warmth. It was a voice from a great distance. "It was just a hug," he repeated, almost to himself. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a pain so deep it stole the air from my lungs. But it wasn't always. And then, he told me. His story didn't come out in a neat, linear narrative. It spilled out in fragments, choked sentences, and long, painful pauses. He grew up in a small town in Ohio. His father wasn't just a strict disciplinarian, he was a man with a temper that was as unpredictable as it was violent. The man everyone in town saw was a deacon in the church, a little league coach. At home, he was a tyrant. Ben described a childhood ruled by fear. The sound of his father's truck in the driveway was a daily moment of terror. AB+ on a report card, a dish left in the sink, the wrong tone of voice, any of these could be a trigger. The punishments were brutal, but they were always carefully administered where the bruises wouldn't show. The worst part, Ben said, his voice trembling, wasn't the hitting. It was the before, the waiting. He'd get this look in his eye, and he'd tell me to come here. Sometimes he'd even say, come give your old man a hug. And I'd have to walk across the room, my legs feeling like jelly, and he'd wrap his arms around me. It was a trap. That hug was the signal. It was the moment I knew the pain was coming. He'd hold me tight so I couldn't get away, and then. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The image was seared into my mind. A small, terrified boy, walking into the arms of his father for a hug that was a prelude to a beating. My hand flew to my mouth, and hot tears streamed down my face. I thought I was going to be sick. I learned to dissociate, he whispered. To just go away in my head. I'd count the cracks in the ceiling, I'd focus on the pattern of the wallpaper, anything to not be there. And I learned that any sudden physical contact, any feeling of being trapped, even by a friendly hug, it sends me right back there. To that living room. I'm 8 years old again, and I'm terrified. He had never told anyone. Not a soul. He'd buried it so deep, constructed a personality of easygoing charm and control to hide the shattered little boy inside. He'd become a structural engineer because he loved the idea of building things that were solid, safe, and predictable, the antithesis of his childhood. I was crying openly now, my heart shattering for him. Without a word, I shifted closer on the couch. I didn't try to hug him. I didn't touch him at all. I just sat beside him, my shoulder a few inches from his, a silent, steady presence. I let the silence hold us, let my quiet tears bear witness to his pain. After a long while, he slowly, tentatively, laid his head on my shoulder. It was the smallest of gestures, but it felt more intimate than any kiss we had ever shared. It was an act of supreme trust. I sat perfectly still, my own tears drying on my cheeks, just letting him be. Letting him, for the first time, share the weight of his burden. That night changed everything. It was the end of our perfect, surface-level relationship and the brutal, beautiful beginning of something real. The following days and weeks were a delicate dance. We had to learn a new language of touch. I learned to always let him see my hands before I reached for him. I learned that a hand on his back, if he was expecting it, was okay, but from behind was not. I learned that sometimes, he just needed space, and that wasn't a rejection of me, but a necessary act of self-preservation. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in complex PTSD. It was a difficult, painful process for him, like slowly taking apart a bomb he'd been carrying inside for 2 decades. There were bad days, nights where he'd wake up sweating from nightmares, days where the world was too loud, too bright, too much. But he was facing it. He was fighting. Our relationship was no longer the easy, champagne and ice sculptures romance I'd thought I wanted. It was messy. It was raw. It was real. We were building something from the ground up, this time with a foundation of brutal honesty and hard-won trust. One evening, about 6 months after his confession, we were in my kitchen. I was washing dishes, and he was drying. The setting sun streamed through the window, painting everything in warm, golden light. I was scrubbing a pot, my back to him. I felt him come up behind me, and I stilled, my hands in the soapy water. He didn't touch me at first. He just stood there, close. Then, slowly, he wrapped his arms around my waist from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. He held me, not tightly, but firmly. Securely. I stopped breathing for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it, the kind of contact from behind that had always been a trigger. The trap, but his hold was different. It was safe. It was an offering, not a demand. It was a choice. I leaned back into him, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart against my back. We stood like that for a long time, silent, in the warm, quiet kitchen. The water ran in the sink, and the world outside kept turning, but in that moment, everything was still. He had spent his whole life running from a hug that meant pain. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the mundane evidence of our shared life, he finally found one that meant safety. It was just a hug. But for us, it was everything. It was a victory. It was a promise. It was the first page of a new story, our story, and it was just beginning.